a little goatee beard. He didn't have sideburns like this, and he had shorter hair, but he was a very elegant fellow, dressed beautifully. And I thought, he was the very image of God. And now here I am, the same age as he was when I first knew him. And I have 5 grandchildren. And I'm sort of no longer impressed by grandfathers. Here I am. I'm one of them too. And this is the same idea, you see, of the round. That we are almost perpetually in the same place, as the French proverb says, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more it changes, the more it's the same thing. Well, that means then, you see, that existence, the feeling of being, is a sort of spectrum. Just as light is at one end red and at the other end violet. And you have to have these extremes in order to have color at all, in order to know light. So you see, likewise, we have to have the experience that there is somebody else, something else going on altogether out of our control, in order to have the experience of being me. And so in order to feel good, to feel that life is worthwhile, that existence is worth going on with, in order to bring out that feeling, just as the red brings out the violet, there has to be in the back of our minds, maybe very far away, the comprehension that there is something that could happen that absolutely mustn't happen, that is the horrors, that is the screaming mimes at the end of the line. We have to know that's there. And every so often, that has to happen. Because if there isn't the experience that we go through, called the screaming mimes at the end of the line, where everything has gone wrong, like just before he died, the British novelist Arnold Bennett said, "I feel somehow that everything is absolutely wrong." So the possibility, even the imagination that there could be such an experience in the back of our heads, is the background which gives intensity to the sense that we call feeling good, feeling that it's all right. It's all right now, I'm only bleeding. So, if you understand that, you see that really and truly you're always in the same place. Just as every creature thinks it's a human being. And as just every being turns out to be a reproduction by some interesting technology, whether it's electronic or biological, makes very little difference. And just as it may be, I don't know, planets are stars' ways of becoming other stars, and so on, and so on, and so on. But the moral is, you're always in the same place. And what is that place? You can ask yourself very, very, I won't say seriously, because this isn't really serious, it's sincere. Ask yourself very sincerely, if that is so, if, in other words, the place in which you are now is the place where everything and everybody else really is, only there's an arrangement to pretend that you ought to be somewhere else. So the place where you are is the place where you're always pretending you ought to be somewhere else. And this is the nature of life. This is the pulse. I ought to be somewhere else. So it's a kind of a gazum like that, see? When if you discover that that's the trick that you're playing on yourself, you become serene. And you don't entirely give up the game because you've seen through it. But you say, It really might be fun to go on playing.
And Alan?
Yeah.
Okay, were we just before? Okay, you were talking about how this led up to what we're going to talk about with the Beatles. And you had gotten through the Roaring '20s.
Yeah.
And they came up with the pill, and they came up with a fix for the venereal diseases.
Yeah.
And then where?
And again, the miniskirt, same thing, you know, and
In the '60s, yes.
yeah, and
I must admit, I was one of the wearers of miniskirts.
yeah, and a whole new type of music just aimed at young people to get them going, and it was sex was plied openly, and it was strange because in the BBC, which was the only television station in Britain at that time, and it's run by the government, you know. And at that time, every employee of the BBC had to come from Eton for security reasons. So basically, these were minor aristocracies running the BBC. And what I noticed when I was small, watching all this stuff, I thought, well, these people, why are the elites giving you a debased culture? Because it was very evident with the shows they were putting on for young people, at taxpayers' expense, by the way. You know, this is all funded by the taxpayer. The elite were giving you a culture which would obviously destroy the culture you already had. And of course, that's what it was intended to do. And sure enough, they gave you the flower power era, the rock groups, the free love, the pill. At the same time, they began to push for abortion clinics because there was still a lot of girls who didn't go on the pill. And so they got the abortion clinics through, covertly at first and then openly. And sure enough, we see today that very few marriages have a chance of lasting more than 3 to 5 years. You know, promiscuity.
That's a what? Say that again.
The chances of marriage today.
Oh,
you know?
Yes.
And promiscuity definitely has been a big part of it. And they knew in the 1800s that if they could get the children committing sexual acts before even puberty, if possible, then there was less likelihood that they would bond for life with a partner down the road. And that's proven to be true. And during the early 1900s, Lord Bertrand Russell, another member of the aristocracy, had his own experimental schools in Britain where he was promoting this very thing to see how they could change children as they grew up. So it had been tested in smaller areas, smaller controlled groups, before it was let loose on the world. And so they knew exactly how to do it and what the effects would be. So there's nothing ever just blasted onto the scene by itself. It's all programmed.
Very, very carefully and long time planned.
Yeah, and then when the Beatles, of course, burst forth with probably more money behind them, promoting them than anybody had ever had before. And so they were famous before anybody really actually heard them.
Yeah, okay, thank you. But now, you know, when I listen to or hear old Beatles songs, they seem so innocent.
Yeah.
And so will you explain what function did the Beatles serve and their music?
You have to listen to the words, number one.
Well, I have.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's been a long day's night, and da-da-da and, Hey Jude.
Yeah, yeah.
I've listened to the words. Only it's been a while. Maybe I would hear something different, but...
Yeah, if you listen to...
Can you think of something?
Yeah, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Okay.
LSD, you know.
Oh, okay.
And Tangerine... Mind you, we're seeing the Tangerine skies now with the spraying, you know. But, yeah, they put the drug message... And all the top groups put drug messages through.
But if people don't understand what that means, how does it get to them?
Oh, they knew what it
Lucy in
meant.
the Sky. Well,
you'd be amazed how quickly children figure things out, you know.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Yep. And
you remember Puff the Magic Dragon?
Oh, yeah.
That was supposed to be about, I guess, marijuana.
Yeah.
I thought it was a cool song.
That's right.
And I would have never thought about what they said that it means.
And it's the same with Burl Ives, you know. Burl Ives before sang the Big Rock Candy Mountain, and it was about homosexual pedophilia. It was an in joke with all of the guys who understood it. And this goes on all the time. You know?
So how does this affect the listeners if they don't consciously understand what the words mean?
It's surprising how much of an effect through subconscious listening. Your subconscious can actually understand more than sometimes your conscious mind, because your conscious is trying to scan things. It's very busy scanning things to censor out those things it doesn't like or whatever. But if your defenses are down and you're not scanning it, it goes right into the subconscious, and your subconscious can figure things out much more quickly. And the magazines as well that they bombarded all the youth with at that time also contained a lot of the messages and explained to the children what these things meant.
Oh, okay.
Like the Rolling Stones magazine.
Oh,
you know.
Sure, there you go.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Rolling Stones magazine was very popular, wasn't it?
Sure. Oh, yeah. So sure, you definitely have... it was a planned, orchestrated blitz, basically, on the public. There were limousines going around universities, guys getting out and throwing big, like garbage bags of LSD over the walls. This is all free LSD to get the LSD culture going. And that's how they started it. They were literally throwing bags over the walls for free. And so this was an orchestrated blitz, you know. And even on the BBC, on the Top of the Pops, as they called it, the shows that they gave you, they joked about this kind of thing going on as though it was all fun, and how tongue in cheek this was. It was all fun. And again, I thought, well, Britain has probably had more control over its people. That's why they're called subjects than any other culture in the West. Why would the elite not only be allowing this, but actually be the ones doing it? It was so evident, because nothing was published in Britain unless the elite authorized it. So this is coming from the top. And
you were telling me about the writer of all the Beatles songs?
Yes.
And today, what's his name? That owns the...
Michael Jackson bought the rights.
Okay. Yeah. Tell our listeners about this.
Yeah, well, the Beatles appeared on the BBC once again in the late 60s. And they all said that they were broke. And when they were asked why they were broke, there was a silence. They wouldn't explain. Looked at each other, sort of knowingly. And no one knew at that time why these guys would be broke. Well, it turned out that they did not own the rights to supposedly their songs, and never had. And then in the early 80s, Theo Adorno, who was the actual owner of those songs, died, and the songs went up for sale. And Paul McCartney at that time put a bid in alongside Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson won the bid, and he now owns the rights to the Beatles songs. So the Beatles never have owned the titles of those songs. So,
well, and they never wrote one of their songs?
I think maybe some of the little drug-induced ditties, I call them, the simplistic stuff, you know, they may have added a bit here and there, but the big ones, no, they didn't, no. And you can tell by the words, too, that someone much older had written them, apart from the fact that much of the music could only have been done by someone who'd studied classical music. And Theo Adorno was a professor of music.
If somebody knew classical music, well, they would know that.
Yes,
Because I didn't know it.
Even simple guitarists, if they look at the types of chord schemes and so on and tempo changes, this is beyond your typical three-chord wonder that you know of so well. And but Theo Adorno was one of the best professors, really, in Germany for many years in all kinds of music, mainly classical. And he came over to Britain and headed the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and he was best friends with the Queen of England. And he definitely worked with Martin, who was the producer for the records and for the Beatles. And I've no doubt at all it was him who wrote them, because he certainly owned the rights of the songs. Yeah. So.
And what was their function?
The function again was to as I say, change society, change culture. Plato had said it thousands of years ago that by his rights, as he said, we should control music very strictly because it affects the minds of the young. And so they knew that from thousands of years ago how the effects can be on the young. And they also knew that if they wanted to give you, to create a generation that would go to war, you'd give them marching type songs and tunes. And if you wanted to degenerate a culture, you give them lots of sensual music. And so this was meant to destroy what was in order to create that which might be, as they say in high masonry.
What was for what might be.
Yeah.
We are playing a game, and the game runs like this. The only thing you really know is what you can put into words. Let's suppose I love some girl rapturously, and somebody says to me, would you really love her? Well, how am I going to prove this? Well, say, write poetry. Tell us all how much you love her, then we'll believe you. So if I'm an artist and I can put this into words and convince everybody that I've written the most ecstatic love letters ever written, they say, all right, okay, we'll admit it, you really do love her. But supposing you're not very articulate, are we going to tell you you don't love her? Surely not. You don't have to be Heloise and Abelard to be in love. So the whole game that our culture is playing is that nothing really happens unless it's in the newspaper. So when we are at a party and there's a great party, somebody said, it's too bad there wasn't a tape recorder. And so our children begin to feel that they don't exist authentically unless they get their names in the papers. And the fastest way of getting your name in the papers is to commit a crime. And then you'll be photographed, then you'll appear in court, then everybody will notice you. It really happened if it was recorded. In other words, if you shout and there doesn't come back an echo, it didn't happen. Well, that's a real hang-up. It's true, there's fun with echoes. We all like singing in the bathtub because there's more resonance there. And when we play a musical instrument like a violin or a cello, it has a sounding box because that gives resonance to the sound. And in the same way, the cortex of the human brain enables us, when we are happy, to know that we are happy. And that gives a certain resonance to it. If you're happy and you don't know you're happy, there's nobody home. But this is the whole problem for us. Several thousand years ago, human beings evolved the system of self-consciousness. And they knew. There was a young man who said, though, it seems that I know that I know. What I would like to see is the eye that knows me when I know that I know that I know. You see? And this is the human problem. We know that we know. And so there came a point in our evolution when we didn't guide life by just trusting our instincts, and had to think about it, and had to purposely arrange and discipline and push our lives around in accordance with foresight and words and systems of symbols, accountancy, calculation, and so on. And then we worry. Once you start thinking about things, you worry as to whether you've thought enough. Did you really take all the details into consideration? Was every fact properly reviewed? And by Jove, the more you think about it, the more you realize that you really couldn't take everything into consideration, because all the variables in any human decision are incalculable. So you get anxiety. And this, though, also, this is the price you pay for knowing that you know, for being able to think about thinking, to feel about feeling. And so you're in this funny position. Now then, do you see that this is simultaneously an advantage and a terrible disadvantage? What has happened here is that by having a certain kind of consciousness, a certain kind of reflexive consciousness, being aware of being aware, being able to represent what goes on fundamentally in terms of a system of symbols, such as words, such as numbers. You put, as it were, two lives together at once, one representing the other. The symbols representing the reality, the money representing the wealth. And if you don't realize that the symbol is really secondary, it doesn't have the same value. You know, people go to the supermarket and they get a whole cartload of goodies and they drive it through, and then the clerk fixes up the counter and this long tape comes out. And you say, $30, please. And everybody feels depressed, because they give away $30 worth of paper, but they've got a cartload of goodies. They don't think about that. They think they just lost $30. But you've got the real wealth in the cart. All you parted with was the paper. Because the paper in our system becomes more valuable than the wealth. It represents power, potentiality, whereas the wealth, you think, oh, well,